You are looking live at the launch pad at Site 31 of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where a Soyuz 2.1A booster is fully fueled, ready to launch 23 minutes from now to carry an unpiloted Soyuz spacecraft to orbit en route to the International Space Station for an automated docking in the wee hours Saturday morning, a critical test flight for Roscosmos in its ability to start using this 2.1A booster and the Soyuz spacecraft for crew launches beginning next March. Good evening from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. This rocket is fully fueled, ready to go. No humans on board, but there is a humanoid robot sitting in the commander seat, in the center seat of the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft, a robot that comes with the affectionate name of FEDOR. It is fully equipped with sensors, ready to collect data, and which will be brought inside the International Space Station for 5 days of experiments next week, and will return to Earth in that Soyuz descent module for a parachute-assisted landing in south-central Kazakhstan in the pre-dawn hours of September 7th, Kazakhstan time, the afternoon of September 6th, U.S. time. The countdown for this launch and this test flight has been by the book. The Soyuz 2.1A booster was fully fueled several hours ago and is now in its so-called stable replenish mode. The countdown proceeding well. The blockhouse in Baikonur reporting all systems are go for liftoff of the Soyuz spacecraft and its 2.1A booster at 10:38 and 32 seconds p.m. Central Time, which is 8:38 and 32 seconds a.m. Baikonur time on Thursday. The weather is crystal clear at Baikonur, 73 degrees Fahrenheit, not a cloud in the sky. We should get a great view of this rocket as it arcs out to the northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator, just as is the case for any Soyuz launch or a Progress resupply mission. It will take 8 minutes and 45 seconds for the spacecraft to reach its preliminary orbit, separate from the third stage of its booster, and begin its trek, in this case a 2-day rendezvous, a 34-orbit rendezvous en route to the International Space Station. The purpose of this flight is multifaceted. It involves both the booster itself and the Soyuz spacecraft. Again, this is an unpiloted Soyuz test flight. It is on the Soyuz MS-14 spacecraft, designed to accomplish several goals. First and foremost, to verify the compatibility on the interfaces between the Soyuz spacecraft and this launch vehicle, which has been used since 2015 to launch Progress resupply missions from Site 31 to the International Space Station. The interface with the launch escape system will be tested. The launch vehicle staging events will be carefully monitored by both launch officials down in Baikonur and the flight control team at the Mission Control Center in Korolyov on the outskirts of Moscow. The motion control system of the Soyuz booster will also be tested. In this case, a new digital telemetry system is available to initiate a roll program for the Soyuz rocket. For the old Soyuz FG-style booster, once it was rolled out to the launch pad, the launch table that it sat on at Site 1, Yuri Gagarin's launch pad, had to be rotated into the precise azimuth of the direction of flight for the Soyuz rocket. In this case, the Soyuz rocket has some steering capability, enhanced engines, and all of that will be tested. Basically a full-up dress rehearsal for the time next March when a crew for the first time will be launched on the 2.1A booster. The rendezvous and docking will be fully automated for this unpiloted Soyuz vehicle. Docking is scheduled in the wee hours of Saturday morning at 12:31 a.m. Central Time, 1:31 a.m. Eastern Time, following a 34-orbit rendezvous. Just like is the case with any Soyuz vehicle that contains a crew, there is no Toru backup rendezvous system. That is the telerobotically operated rendezvous system that backs up the Core's automated rendezvous system on the Soyuz spacecraft. In the case of a Progress with no crew on board for a cargo ship, the cosmonauts on board the International Space Station have the ability to operate from a workstation in the Zvezda service module, operating a joystick so that they could manually fly a Progress in for a docking to the International Space Station in the unlikely unlikely event that the Corps' automated rendezvous system should experience a failure. That is not the case here, with no Taurus system equipped in this Soyuz spacecraft. Instead, Alexei Ovchinin, the ISS commander for Expedition 60, and Alexander Skvortsov, his cosmonaut compadre, the flight engineer for the Expedition 60 crew, will be standing by with the ability to initiate an abort command if a problem occurs with the Corps' automated rendezvous system early Saturday morning during the terminal phase of the rendezvous and approach for the automated docking by the Soyuz spacecraft to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. We are now 17 minutes away from launch. Again, everything has been proceeding by the book with the countdown. We are hoping for some in-cabin views of the humanoid robot, FEDOR, as it is called. The Roscosmos Russian space agency calls this experiment Skybot F-850. This humanoid robot, again, will be brought inside the Poisk module, where it will be mounted next week for 5 days of experiments before returning to the Soyuz several days before undocking and landing to bring not only the robot home, but the Soyuz MS-14 spacecraft to be able to analyze the spacecraft's telemetry, all of the data collected inside the spacecraft, and most notably how this unpiloted Soyuz vehicle maintained its compatibility with the booster heading uphill today for the 8 minutes and 45 seconds of powered flight. We're approaching the 15-minute mark until launch. Again, the Site 31 launch pad is the venue for today's liftoff of the Soyuz MS-14, again unpiloted, with the humanoid robot FEDOR sitting in the commander's seat, in the center seat of the descent module of the three-section Soyuz spacecraft. Just like any other Soyuz vehicle, there are three sections. The top section, which is the bulbous section of the Soyuz vehicle, is called the habitation module. The center section, in which a crew is normally strapped into the three seats, is the descent module, and the lower section is the instrumentation and propulsion module that, of course, carries just what it implies, all of the fuel and plumbing for the engines on the Soyuz vehicle. At the time of launch, coming up just under 15 minutes from now, the International Space Station will be flying 260 miles over North Africa, right at the border between Chad and the Sudan. The Expedition 60 crew on board the station is asleep at this hour. This launch coming about 9 hours following the completion of a 6-hour, 32-minute spacewalk earlier today, conducted by NASA astronauts Nick Hague and Drew Morgan to install the second of the international docking adapters to the space-facing side of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. We now have two IDAs, or international docking adapters, that will be used for the link-up of commercial crew vehicles and the next generation of SpaceX Dragon cargo vehicles in the future. One is at the forward port of the Harmony module, linked to International Docking Adapter number 2. And today's spacewalk completed a flawless installation and activation of the International Docking Adapter number 3, which was mated earlier today to pressurized mating adapter number 3, again on the zenith or space-facing side of the Harmony module. Today's launch continues a virtually unbroken sequence of major operational activities on the International Space Station. Next Tuesday, August 27th, the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft that arrived at the station with several tons of supplies and scientific experiments last month will be released from the grasp of the Canadarm2 robotic arm. The departure of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft will be covered live on NASA television next Tuesday, August 27th, beginning at 9:15 a.m. Central Time for a release at 9:42 a.m. Central Time. Dragon will be headed for a splashdown later in the day next Tuesday in the Pacific, some 300 miles to the southwest of Long Beach, California. Also aboard the Soyuz MS-14, 1,450 pounds of cargo in the form of supplies for the expedition's 60 crew has been loaded on board on either side of the humanoid robot, which again is strapped into the Soyuz commander seat, the center seat of the descent module. That cargo will be unloaded on Saturday once the vehicle has automatically docked to the Poisk module. We are coming up on the 10-minute mark until launch. Again, the countdown has proceeded flawlessly. This unpiloted test flight of the Soyuz spacecraft and the 2.1A booster has been planned for the past 3 years by Roscosmos. Again, the final flight of the old FG-style booster is scheduled for September 25th, when the Soyuz MS-15 is launched with Oleg Skripochka, NASA astronaut Jessica Meir, and United Arab Emirates spaceflight participant Hazza Ali Al-Mansouri on a 4-orbit, 6-hour journey to the International Space Station. Al-Mansouri, under a contract between the United Arab Emirates and Roscosmos, will spend 8 days on board the International Space Station, returning to Earth with Nick Hague and Alexei Ovchinin on October 3rd. That launch on September 25th is the last currently scheduled launch by a crew off of Site 1, Yuri Gagarin's launch pad, which saw Gagarin rocket into space on his Vostok spacecraft on April 12, 1961, to inaugurate human spaceflight of the cosmos. The countdown now approaching the T-minus 9-minute mark. From this point on, as we approach the 8-minute mark in the countdown, events will occur in rapid-fire succession. At the T-minus 7-minute mark, a launch key will be inserted in the launch bunker at the blockhouse in Baikonur, a real key, transitioning the launch sequence into automatic mode. At about the T-minus 4-minute mark, onboard systems on the Soyuz MS-14 will be switched to onboard control, internal control. The first stage booster tanks will be pressurized for flight at the T-minus 2-minute 45-second mark, and the ground propellant feed will be terminated to the 2.1A booster at the T-minus 1-minute 30-second mark. There are two umbilical structures that are buttressed up against the side of the 2.1A booster. You can see those black structures against the white booster. The first of those two umbilical structures will retract at about the T-minus 35-second mark. The second of the two umbilicals will retract at about the T-minus 12-second mark, initiating the launch sequence. T-minus 7 minutes and counting. Again, the major objectives of this test flight are to verify the integration, the compatibility, if you will, of the Soyuz spacecraft with this 2.1A launch vehicle. They also will test a modernized guidance, navigation, and control system, a motion control system, and entry control system of the Soyuz spacecraft. This all not only designed for an enhanced capability to launch crews to the International Space Station beginning next March, but to also aid in the development of an unpiloted Soyuz payload return vehicle that will enable the return of cargo to the ground from the Russian segment of the International Space Station. The only vehicle currently in the ISS inventory that returns cargo intact to the ground is the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft, which parachutes to a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Inside 6 minutes till launch. The Launch Control Center in Baikonur reporting that the range is clear. The Soyuz rocket ready to begin this test flight. This launch site, Site 31, for today's launch and crew launches beginning next March on the 2.1A booster. It's been used 3 previous times for launches of crews to the International Space Station while Gagarin's launch pad, Site 1, was under refurbishment. This launch site is about an hour's drive away from the Site 254 integration building, the suit-up facility, where astronauts and cosmonauts of expedition crews suit up for launch on particular launch days. T-minus 4 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. At the time of launch, again, the International Space Station, its 6-person crew asleep at this hour, will be flying over North Africa at the border between Chad and the Sudan, about 3,000 statute miles behind the Soyuz as it begins its 8-minute, 45-second climb to orbit. T-minus 4 minutes and counting. And the booster's fuel tanks are being drained to maintain the proper level of fuel prior to tank pressurization, which is coming up momentarily. 2 minutes, 35 seconds until launch. Again, the launch time in Baikonur, 8:38 and 32 seconds a.m. Baikonur time on Thursday morning. And the booster tanks are now being pressurized. We're about 35 seconds or so away from the ground propellant feed being terminated to the Soyuz 2.1A booster. This test flight ready to roll. "90 seconds from launch, everything proceeding on time." T-minus 1 minute and counting. The Soyuz spacecraft MS-14 now on internal power, preparing for the retraction of the first umbilical and the initiation of auto sequence start. You see the retraction of that first umbilical. T-minus 22 seconds and counting. The second umbilical has now retracted. This initiates engine sequence start. We have engine ignition. Turbo pumps up to flight speed and liftoff. Liftoff of the unpiloted Soyuz MS-14 spacecraft on a test flight to pave the way for future crew launches to the International Space Station. The Soyuz spacecraft now arcing out to the northeast, heading for an orbit 51.6 degrees inclined to the International Space Station for a rendezvous and docking early Saturday morning. First stage engines performing nominally according to the blockhouse in Baikonur. "44 seconds into the flight. Good roll, pitch, and yaw program. "50 seconds into the flight, everything proceeding nominally. Yaw, pitch, and roll all reported to be nominal. Good reports from the blockhouse in Baikonur. First stage engines performing as advertised. Beautiful view of the Soyuz MS-14 atop the 2.1A booster, initiating this test flight. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight. Standing by for first stage shutdown. We have staging, and there's a view inside the descent module of the Soyuz MS-14 of the humanoid robot FEDOR. the flag of Russia grasped in his right hand. Two and a half minutes into the flight, everything proceeding normally. We have jettison of the launch shroud. This view now from the upper stage camera, looking back down the longitude of the Soyuz 2.1A booster, approaching the 3-minute mark into the flight, everything proceeding normally. The Soyuz traveling 5,600 miles an hour, 58 miles in altitude, 100 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, heading right down the pike. Second stage engines firing normally, everything looking good. Three and a half minutes into the flight, engines are up and running off of the second stage, looking good. Good vehicle stabilization reported from the blockhouse in Baikonur. 5 minutes of powered flight remaining. The vehicle reported to be rock steady and stable. Four minutes, 15 seconds into the flight. Second stage performance is by the book so far, according to the blockhouse in Baikonur. The guidance, navigation, and control system, the performance of the engines, all being evaluated by Russian space officials in this test flight to set the stage for the launch of future crews on this 2.1A booster beginning next March. We have second stage shutdown. Third stage up and running. We have third stage lower skirt jettisoning. Third stage up and running. 3.5 minutes of powered flight remaining on this third stage of the 2.1A booster. Again, this booster has been used since 2015 to launch unpiloted Progress resupply vehicles. This, the first flight of a Soyuz vehicle, a manned vehicle. However, no crew on board today. Now seeing animation based on real-time telemetry coming in from the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside of Moscow. And back to the live view from an external upper stage camera looking back down the Soyuz 2.1A booster. 6 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. 2.5 minutes of powered flight remaining. The Soyuz traveling at 12,000 miles an hour, 120 miles in altitude, 587 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The vehicle reported to be very stable, good engine performance, everything looking good. Seven minutes into the flight, 1 minute, 45 seconds of powered flight remaining. 7 minutes, 35 seconds into the flight. So far, so good. About 1 minute of powered flight remaining. After a third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation, we should be seeing the deployment of the Soyuz MS-14's solar arrays and navigational antennas within seconds thereafter. And the Soyuz will be en route to the International Space Station for a rendezvous and docking in the wee hours Saturday morning. 8 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight, about 25 seconds of powered flight remaining. Standing by, and we have third stage shutdown and third stage separation. And there go the solar arrays. And the solar arrays and navigational antennas have all deployed as planned, a flawless climb to orbit for Soyuz MS-14 in its test flight, the first launch of a Soyuz vehicle on the 2.1A booster. Back inside the descent module, this is Skybot, or FEDOR as it is affectionately known. He made it to orbit and is en route to the International Space Station, where he will be brought inside the Poisk module next week for 5 days of testing and experiments by Alexander Skvortsov and Alexei Ovchinin before being returned to the center seat, the Soyuz commander seat, if you will, in the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft. And you can see the commanding as it moves its head upward. The toy that is dangling above FEDOR is a cosmonaut toy, basically a zero-G indicator, now that the Soyuz is heading towards the International Space Station. There are commands being sent to this Skybot from Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov. Again, you can see the head of FEDOR, the Skybot, the humanoid robot, in the center seat of the descent module, which is normally occupied by the Soyuz commander, as the MS-14 begins its journey toward the International Space Station, rendezvous and docking on tap for early Saturday morning with an automated link-up to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, planned at 12:31 a.m. Central Time, 1:31 a.m. Eastern Time, Saturday morning. Once again, a flawless launch for the 2.1A booster in the initial test flight of the Soyuz spacecraft's compatibility with this booster that had previously been used only for unpiloted Progress cargo flights to the station. This setting the stage, if everything checks out as is expected, setting the stage for crews to be launched on the 2.1A booster beginning next March. 1,450 pounds of cargo are stowed in the Soyuz vehicle, flanked on either side of the humanoid robot that you see in this view from in-cabin television. That will be brought on board the station along with the robot itself in the days ahead. The Core's automated rendezvous system is up and running, reported to be in good shape. So everything is operating by the book so far. Reports from the Russian Mission Control Center indicate that the 2.1A booster did its job perfectly, placing the Soyuz MS-14 into a perfect orbit on its trajectory toward the International Space Station. The station and its 6 occupants, the Expedition 60 crew, currently flying just to the northeast of the launch site of the Baikonur Cosmodrome, from which the MS-14 lifted off just 14 minutes and 16 seconds ago. This view now from an external television camera on the Soyuz spacecraft, providing flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center with their first view of some of the orbital parameters and some of the engineering data that you have become familiar with over the years. So everything is checking out as planned. This view from a balcony camera overlooking the large International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow. With the Soyuz MS-14 successfully in orbit, in a perfect orbit en route to the International Space Station, we'll wrap up our launch coverage, launch occurring right on time at 10:38 and 32 seconds p.m. Central Time, which was 8:38:32 a.m. in Baikonur on Thursday morning. MS-14 flying for the first time for a Soyuz vehicle on the 2.1A booster and the start of a critical test flight that will pave the way for future crews to launch on this same booster configuration beginning next March. September's launch of the next crew to the International Space Station on the MS-15 spacecraft will be the final launch on the old FG booster and the final launch currently contemplated from Yuri Gagarin's launch pad at Site 1 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. With MS-14 en route to the station, we'll wrap up our coverage for tonight. With a programming reminder, we'll be back on the air on Friday night Central Time, just before midnight, 11:45 p.m. Central Time Friday night, 12:45 a.m. Eastern Time Saturday morning, with our rendezvous and docking coverage for the Soyuz MS-14, the unpiloted spacecraft that will make an automated link up to the Poisk module of the International Space Station. For now, we'll sign off. It's been a busy day here in Mission Control Houston. We wish you all the best, and we'll see you back here on Friday evening. This is Mission Control Houston.